Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. If you are watching this on YouTube as a VOD, you'll notice that things have changed a little bit over the last 4 years. If you're watching this live, you might have heard this before. So, hey everybody. I have started a YouTube video, or channel, which you can see the link to there. And in the process of transporting my VODs from Twitch to YouTube, I discovered that I had missed some videos, saving some VODs. So we are going to be doing a series of, not necessarily replays, because I'm not going to replay the old video, but more like redos. And tonight we're actually going to redo the second ever Adventures in History stream, which was done all the way back in May of 2020. So hopefully by this point we have it a little bit better set up. I know that the computer is substantially better, the lighting is way better, I've got a lot more plastic stuff on the shelves behind me, we have more commands and there's more stuff going on. So that's what's going on, and that's why the title says Adventures in History 002 instead of the next one that would have been, I think, like 170 or something like that. Going back in time for a history stream, right? Anyway, so welcome everybody. That's what we're up to. Let me say hello to everybody. Matt, good to see you. Cave Geek. Frank Big Time, what's going on? Allie is here. My wife is here, of course. So hey everybody, hope things are going well in your world, and I appreciate everybody coming out to hang out. What's up, Chocobo? Good to see you. So, first off, why the YouTube channel? Mostly because everybody kept asking for it. I would mention, hey, I do educational content on the internet, and the next thing out of their mouth was, what's your YouTube channel? And I didn't have one, because it is work to move VODs from from Twitch to YouTube. And because I am a new account, there are also upload limits, so there are only so many videos that I can upload a day, and I have at this point about 300 episodes between the Adventures in History stuff, the Tolkien stuff that I've done, and the viewer request streams that I've done. It's about 290 VODs. And moving at about 5 or 6 a day is a job. But I am making headway. I have made some progress, especially after I got back from Dragon Con. So we're going to just do some stuff here, and I'll fill it in so that the YouTube content is basically unbroken. And we'll be doing some viewer request stream makeups, and we'll be doing some Adventures in History makeups. I still have all of the Tolkien stuff, so I won't be having to do any of that stuff again. But there we go. You'll also notice that I'm much more gray now than I was 4 years ago. I've been watching too many of my VODs, and I've gone gray pretty fast. Must be the stress. If maybe there was something stressful that happened in 2020 that would have caused me to begin a deleterious glide towards silver foxdom. I don't know. An unbroken sentence moving from topic to topic. It was really quite hypnotic. Just temples in the beard. It's distinguished. Yeah, it's distinguished. So I've always had, how do I get it to show up? This guy. I've always had this skunk spot. That's a birthmark. So I've had that forever. But yeah, the goatee is definitely going. And a little bit like right in here, right? All right. So all the way back in May of 2020, what were we discussing? So the first stream that I ever did was sort of like, I called it a soft open, and it was really just a justification for why I was doing what I was doing. And it wasn't necessarily historical in content. It was just me telling my story and sharing who I was. And I decided that I wasn't going to post that one on the YouTube series because it's very personal, and I talk about a lot of people in specific. And I don't know if they necessarily wanted me to mention them and their location by such direct name. So I chose not to put that one on YouTube. But the first actual stream was discussion about how we know what we know. And as a way to start talking about history and archaeology, I wanted to explain how we know this stuff. And I think it's really important for us to ask questions about the process that we use to determine what we think is real. And there's some really strong historical epistemology that we can use here to sort of figure out why we know what we know and how we know what we know and the techniques that are used to explain what we know. What's up, Tommy? How's it going, man? Yeah, so this is more like historical epistemology, and we're going to be talking mostly about particular techniques and how they came about and how we use them to explain stuff, historically speaking. So I just realized that I should probably have pulled out some of my more specific artifacts, but maybe I can put the screen on break here for just a bit and get some stuff a little bit later on. But yeah, we've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about here. And if you were around, I don't actually know, and this is really, really interesting, I don't know if anybody in the chat right now was here when I first started streaming. I don't think anybody in here may have been. Maybe Cave Geek, one of the older, not older, but like one of my original supporters. But I don't even think Cave Geek was here at the most earliest of streams. Brittany was here, of course, sure. I don't even know if you had... Did you have mod powers already that early? Anyway, so let's sort of get at it. So, historically speaking, how do we know what we know? And archaeologically speaking, how do we know what we know? These are great. These are good questions. And the easiest thing that I can tell you is, if we're looking at how we know what we know, we have to look at what we leave behind. And humans make stuff, and we make garbage, and we make things that we use in our daily life, and we discard things, and we wear stuff, and we wear things out, and we keep making stuff over and over and over again. And these are great questions, says the guy who asked them. I said we're doing epistemology, not ontology, Tommy. Come on, back off. Right? Anyway, so we're looking at the stuff that we leave behind. And there are a lot of things that we can leave behind. And when we do this, this is what we start using as a basis to try to explain the past. If we go all the way back in like the earliest part of humans' history, we didn't really have houses, and we didn't really have any kind of, sedentary life. I really do need to get some artifacts here, and I'm kicking myself for not pulling these down earlier. So let me go on break for, it'll be literally like just a few seconds, and then I'll pop right back in. I just need to reach over here and carefully grab this, and I don't want to do it quickly because I don't want to drop it. But give me just a second. Just a second. Okay, sorry about that. So, when we're not living in cities and we're not living in sedentary places, it's still possible for us to know what we know. Because we can still find things that are ancient. And I can show you some of these things. And now, this is actually something that I didn't have on the original stream. So we can actually look at specific artifacts here. So let me make sure that this is zoomed in the right way. So even before we live in houses, we're still making things, and we're still using things, and we're still touching things. Like this guy. This is a scraper, or a knife, or a tool that was obviously made on purpose, and was designed on purpose, and fits rather nicely in your hands, or your fingers here, so that you can get some action. But when we find something like this, we can still get a fair amount of information from it. We can look at how things like this were made and compare them to other artifacts that we have on hand. We can look at the particular methods that were used. We can hypothesize about the techniques that were used, specifically for stuff like making this nice edge here. But we can compare this to other things and know about the people that made it. Another thing that we can do now, which is really, really great, is that we could take something like this and flake a very small piece of it off, and then use all sorts of science to determine where this came from. We can determine how long ago it was worked. We can do things like determine where this particular tool traveled over the course of its life. For example, if it comes from a specific location and we find it 100 miles away, tools like these had really interesting lifespans. So that particular guy right there is a really, really old piece of human history. It's probably from the middle or late Bronze Age. It's probably 6-ish thousand years old, right? Back before we were even living in cities, somebody made this little thing, right? But we know that because we can look at the stuff that we've left behind. And we have really, really, really large collections of tools, points, scrapers, etc. And we can look at how fast this technology spread. We can look at how far it moved. We can do things like hypothesize whether or not groups of people had contact with each other. And we can still do a lot of stuff like that, even if we don't necessarily have a house to dig up, right? Let me catch up with chat. Can't wait for anthropologists looking back on our digital dark age, trying to decipher our life by IKEA and Gundam models. They went to a furniture store for meatballs. Well, they did. They did. Is a meatball a type of beanbag chair? This is why you carve Brittany, Queen of the World, on every stone you can find. Hey, there we go, right? You're just throwing off the future. Sure. Joined at the moment you said, and we're still touching things. Okay, sure. Right? But the point here is, even if we don't have a house to dig up, we can still tell a lot about a person. And it does make it a lot easier when we start living in places, just to be honest. And the biggest reason why it makes it easier is because when we're living in one place, we get more stuff. And that stuff can literally pile up over time. And we can use some interesting terms to describe these things. For example, tepe. You might have heard various places with the word tepe in it. Tepe is the same thing as a kirbit or a hoyuk. The word that we would use probably is a tell. So all of these words mean basically the same thing. They are false hills that are man-made. They are the product of sedentary life over a period of time. And in a lot of cases, they're very evident. And let me show you one here. There's going to be a lot of Adventure Hat tonight. Just lots and lots of Adventure Hat. I don't even know if I was wearing the Adventure Hat in stream number 2. I don't even know if that was a thing on the stream yet. I know that I did not have the Adventure Hat emote on the second stream. Because I wasn't even fully approved to make emotes on the second stream yet. But this is a place in Turkey That's called Altuntepe. And what we can see here is there's this really great line of mountains, and then this really flat valley, and then suddenly this big hill. Now, why just this random hill? And the answer is that people lived here for a long time. And over the course of time, we could just bring stuff to the same location, right? So the ground level for this place is here, and all of this hill is basically the evidence of human habitation. Let me show you another one. This is the big tell at a site called Gordion. This was a really, really big city. It was probably the capital of Phrygia. Phrygia was a country that was pretty big in Western Turkey. But this is, again, a false hill. It's not an actual geographic mark. It's a big old bunch of stuff that people have made. Inamev, what's up? Welcome in. Good to see you. You don't know what the topic is, but the hat looks cool. Yeah, so this is the adventure hat. And I have to wear this when I go do archaeology stuff because I burn really bad. And I'm losing my hair on the top of my head, so I need something that covers my head and my ears and offers me shade. So I hide under the adventure hat, right? Was that the hill they wanted to die on? I don't know, maybe. And I just think I heard the camera die? Why did the camera die? Oh no, the camera's not plugged in. Oops. That's what I get. So I guess we won't be showing any more after I went and got the artifact stuff. Now the phone is dead. All right, give me just a second. Let me plug the phone back in. I'm sorry, everybody. This was obviously not very well designed. 2 seconds. Sorry about that. Well, I guess if I'm just being honest, I was in a bit of a funk prior to stream. And I didn't really do a very good job of prepping stuff. So, sorry. And it's back. Okay. So we've got some other items that we can show tonight that I think will add interesting elements to the stream. All right, catching up with chat. Was that the hill they wanted to die on? I'm not sure. Is that the hill Kate Bush sang about? Probably. Did the Cahokia Mounds count as those? Technically, no, Tommy, because the difference here between a tell and a mound is that the mounds were purposefully constructed for some reason. They were made for houses to be built on top of. They were made for ceremonial meetings. They were made to get people out of the water if they were in a floodplain. But a tell happens sort of naturally. Well, not naturally, but it happens over time. They didn't go out and build the big mound, right? They kept using mud bricks and bringing stuff in and bringing stuff in and bringing stuff in and bringing stuff in. And over time, it just builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. So it's not necessarily a purposefully built mound that they put the city on top of. It's just that habitation happens over and over and over in the same spot. and it literally builds on top of itself. I'm Spartacus. I love tails and mounds equally. That's fine. I do too. Tommy, thank you so much for the subscription, man. Appreciate it. Is the puppy cam okay? Well, so I got it back on, and I got it plugged back in, and then it immediately died again. So it's currently charging. It's like at 2% or 1%. So we'll leave it alone, I guess. Now we adventure to plug in the ancient phone, right? It is an ancient phone. It's actually a very, very old Samsung. It's a Samsung Galaxy J3 6. It's very old. It's from like 2014, 2015. Yeah, so I can't do the umlauts on my particular keyboard. Enmev, Hoyuk is a Turkish word. But you do see the umlauts on top of the letters. And it's perfectly cool to point that out. I did want to show you this because this is something that I didn't have when we first went to when I first did the stream. So I wanted to share this with you and see if I could get this to work. So let's see if this works. I don't know if it's going to or not. Well, now I've realized that I can't see chat to see if it's working. So what we're looking at here is the tell at Gordion. And this is obviously from the air. And you can see where they've done excavation. So the top of the tell is here, and you can see that they've done different pits and dug down different levels here. You can see as we're panning around that this is work that they're doing here on the external wall of the old city. One thing that's interesting, we can pause here for just a second. You see this giant pile of stuff here, and then you see this giant pile of stuff here. This is all stuff coming out of the dig. And these are likely all cataloged because they are pieces of a thing or part of a thing, which is why they're laid out. This is probably, and as weird as it sounds, a lot of this is probably broken pottery or old rock that was just sort of loose and knocked over. But when we pan around the city here, and by the way, I can't see chat right now, so if you're asking me questions, I'm not going to be able to see that. You can see where they've done different excavation. But to get to the levels of habitation, you literally have to dig down. You have to start at the top and work your way down into history. And the city itself had been a site of habitation for a very, very long time, several centuries, going back to the Bronze Age and all the way through the Iron Age. And the sites that we're looking at are from different periods of time because of the location that they are on the tell. This is panning around to show this is a big tumulus, which is hypothesized to be King Midas's tomb. You can see here that there are other parts of the tell that are outside. This could be a tumulus here, a tumulus here. So the city itself might have been larger than just the big part in the middle. But the point here is, look, this is all flat, and you can see that this is the plain. So this hill where the city is not normal. This is the result of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of human activity. This is the big gate to the city right here. I should be in here in this video somewhere. I can't remember exactly where I was when the video was being taken. But this is the stuff, right? That hill, if you dig into it, has stuff in it. And that's how we know how old things are. Is this a video capture? So that was video from Turkey. That was captured by a friend named Tirod the last time I was in Turkey in 2022. So we have these tells, and we know where people lived because stuff was built up that way. Teresa, welcome in. Hope that you're having a good one. I know that I've seen your name somewhere, and I can't remember the connection. Are you somebody that I met in Casey's chat, maybe? And also, Nmev, I'm not sure if I said hello to you. I think I said hello. But I'm not sure how you found me. I always like to ask how people found me, because that helps me figure out how I can best market myself. And a lot of times it's just, I saw you on Twitch, and I popped in. So if that's it, that's cool too. But if there was a link, I would appreciate it if I could know about that. But let me show you some stuff here, and I guess I should be wearing the adventure hat, just to be honest, but like, all of this stuff is stuff that I've seen and can talk about specifically. So this is at a place on the other side of Turkey that's actually quite a bit older. This is a site called Kavachtepe, and this location is an ancient city of Urartu, and specifically it was a big fortress, but I wanted to show you here what was making the tell. So if we zoom in here, you can see all of this stuff. And you can see how this is separate from the dirt, because these would have been ancient walls. And the buildings, of course, would have had roofs that were put on top of them, usually thatched on top of poles. But imagine all of these mud bricks on top of this hill over the course of, 600, 700 years in some situations. How many times do you have to go get new bricks to make new walls? And how many times do the walls fall over and then, knock stuff down and make a big mess and then get soaked with rain? If we look at this stuff right here, these are actually in a little bit worse shape, but it gets the point across. So this big mound here of what looks like just mud used to be bricks, but it has decayed and deteriorated over time because of being exposed to the elements. And this is where most of the material that makes up a tell comes from. So when we're looking at a place to dig, it's not usually very hard to find a place to dig, because you can go find these big random hills in the middle of nowhere. But this is what you're digging through a lot of the time, is the leftover refuse of these mud bricks. Now, I picked this particular picture on purpose so that we could look at this little section right here. A lot of the cities that are popular in basically Neolithic times up use this same sort of method, where the base of the wall was going to be made out of stone. Now, this isn't really good stone. This is early bronze, maybe middle bronze, probably early bronze though, stone that they basically just pile up. And you see that we try to make some level side here, and then we put our mud bricks on top of it. This is an attempt at keeping your walls out of the dirt, basically, off the ground and out of the wash that might just be moving around on the street. So many times you'll find a site, if we kind of look out here, all of the bricks, all of the mud bricks from this part of the site are gone, and the only thing left is the stone base on all of these things. So that's fairly common, but where did that dirt go? Well, that dirt is now on top of this hill. Right? And I think I've sort of beaten this point to death, but that's where these things come from. And we can go look at this stuff and we can know where it came from. Now, what's interesting about this is we can employ a tactic here that is called stratigraphy. And stratigraphy is based on the examination of layers or strata. So this is sort of like stratus cloud, right? And when we're looking at a site, we are basically digging backwards in time. So if you start at the top of a tell or an excavation site, you are digging into the most recent layer of that site. This is stuff that might have been, 1,000 years old, 500 years old. It doesn't really matter. The last people that lived there or the last people that walked there are the ones that are going to be on the top. And if you've ever done any kind of gardening, you'll know that the deeper you dig, the more likely you are to find something completely random, like an old soda can from the 70s, or you keep digging and you might find a glass bottle from the 30s or something like that, right? Many people think that archaeologists' favorite movie, Indiana Jones, but it's actually The Warriors, because we clink all the bottles together and say that we all need to come out and play. I don't know. Indiana Jones does destroy a lot of stuff, just to be honest with you, and it's not necessarily. Oh, can I dig it? Can you dig it? Wow, that's a really good one that I completely missed. Right? What's up, Sci-Fi? You're going to be right at home here. We're talking up our alley, right? But I think that we all kind of like the same sorts of things. I don't think we would be here if we didn't. As always, by the way, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, or if anything that I'm saying strikes a chord, or you want to compare it to something else, as always, you're welcome to ask questions, take us off on tangents, do whatever you need to do, because that's why we're here. We're here to talk and learn. This isn't a lecture, right? I don't want this to feel like a lecture. I want this to feel like we're having a conversation with each other. And I just want to show you cool stuff and talk about how we figured things out, right? But with stratigraphy, we start at the top and we dig backwards in time. Now, this can be problematic. And the biggest way that it can be problematic is that as you dig, in many cases, you end up destroying stuff, right? So if we start at the top level and we go down, I don't know, let's say, 15, 20 centimeters, 6, 7 inches, right? We might hit the beginning of a habitation site. And then we would need to clear everything from that area off down to that same level, where we could see the bases of the walls, where we could see fire pits, where we could see artifacts, and we would need to get all of that excavated and visible so that we can document it the right way. But here's the thing. If we know that there is a Bronze Age civilization habitation at this site, and we go down 15, 20 centimeters, 6, 7 inches, thanks, Claire, for the corgi bits, as always. If we get down 6, 7 inches or 12, 15 centimeters, we're going to be digging at a site that's much more modern than the Bronze Age, most likely. We're going to be digging into something that might be, Ottoman, or something that might be Renaissance. But if we want to get to the Bronze Age stuff, we've got to keep going. And what that means is we literally have to destroy that level. Now, we're obviously going to take out all of the relics and all of the artifacts, but buildings, baseboards, or, wall bases that are made out of stone, mud bricks, those are probably going to get scrapped. And that's kind of rough. What's up, Bubba? You were born at an early age. Weren't we all? It's good to see you, man. It's been a while. I hope that you're doing well up in your world. Probably really rainy in your world today because the remnants of the storm made its way up your direction. It rained all day here yesterday. Uh, it rained all day yesterday here. Words. Anyway, not as bad as you thought it would be. Yeah, I hear you. It wasn't as bad as we thought it would be either. We had a hurricane yesterday, everybody. So we're literally destroying things as we get older and get further down in the tell. And today, this isn't necessarily as bad as it sounds, because in today's world, excavations are usually done pretty slow and with a lot of photographs, right? And especially now that we have very, very significant levels of scrutiny around archaeology, stuff is absolutely sort of expected to be cataloged. Now, it doesn't always get that way, but it's absolutely expected to be. So you'll see, in many cases, multiple different publications being done about the same site. And, well, CRM stuff is... try not to get too far off into the weeds, but I have problems with that. Yeah, the photographs help a lot, and especially with modern drone technology, you can photograph the entire site down to millimeters, and you can get 3D maps of everything, and you can preserve everything in a digital state, even if you're going to dig through walls to get to other things that are further down in the pile. And let me be very clear here. Again, we're not talking about like destroying all of the artifacts. We're basically just talking about digging through the floor of one building to get to the floor of another building, right? And that still does problems, right? You know, it still has issues, but it's kind of hard sometimes to decide how far you want to go in some areas, because what happens if we get to this one area and there are these really beautiful mosaics? Well, you just stalled, right? If you just uncovered some mosaics from, like, you know, Roman late antiquity, you are not digging the rest of that site for years, because they're going to come in and move every single one of those tiles out very, very delicately, and they're going to move them to a museum where they can reconstruct them very, very delicately, and you're not going to dig any further until we get all of that stuff moved out of the way. You did CRM archaeology? Well, yeah, I hear you. We've come a long way from using dynamite for archaeology. That's where I was getting at. It wasn't always that way. And unfortunately, in the early days of archaeology, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, we lost stuff that we will never get back. Because people were literally doing things like taking a bulldozer and running into the side of a tell and just scraping the wall out. Or literally blowing stuff up with dynamite. Which obviously destroys a lot of stuff. I didn't really get the idea of looking back more than 1,000 years, like trying to understand early life. And yeah, absolutely, NMF. A good archaeologist and a good anthropologist and a good historian is always trying to understand people regardless of when they are. What's up, Silver? Good to see you. Can't do academic archaeology everywhere. Yeah, but I'm kind of partial. With so many relics in the tell, I see it's kind of hard to continue the dig, but somehow I always keep cataloging product shards every day. Yeah, I mean, let me show you something here. So this is a dig site that I was at in Turkey. And this is an active dig site, so this is why it's all uncovered and, you know, you can see all of this stuff. But I chose these photographs in particular because they are really, really good examples of stratigraphy. So if we look here at the top level, we just have fill dirt, right? So this is probably just your average everyday occurrence of dirt over time. And we have this line right here that was probably the base of a wall. But then we move down a little bit and we see that there's a lot of stuff going on here. And there is a lot of activity during this area because you can see how much stuff is there. And then we have this great thing. JMR, what's going on, man? Good to see you. We have this big black line right here. that goes across the entire site. And I really, really love this photograph for this particular line because this is all over the site. If you dig down to this strata anywhere on this tell, you run into this big black char line because the city was burned. And this is the remnants of all of the stuff that was in the city that was flammable when the city was burned. And when you're digging, you know, you're just imagining digging down. When you get to right about here, you start running into an entire layer that's just char. Which is kind of wicked cool if you think about it, because you just discovered that the city got burned, right? And of course, we keep digging down here to the original settlement layer, which is down here. And this would have been a house. You can see the steps leading down into the house. These would have been the walls of the house. I got another picture here that's a little bit better on the bulk wall over here. But you can see how all of this stuff packs over time. You can see the different coloration of the strata. Dun dun dun. And Mev, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the adventure. They have better walls than us. Well, so this wall right here is the archaeological dig. So you can tell in this picture that this is a square. And most dig sites are going to divide things into squares. So this is not the natural wall of the site. This is just where the archaeologists started digging, right? We started digging up here and then went down. And you can tell even like putting little tags in the wall at specific locations for specific times and dates and references. But this is stratigraphy. This is how we sort of put things together. Oh, it's a gin and juice parody, and I didn't recognize the gin and juice parody. With so many relics in the tell I see, it's kind of hard to continue the D-I-double-G. Okay, now I hear it because I can sing gin and juice to the lyrics. Okay, now I see it. Thank you. Kind of hard being Snoop D-I-double-G. Anyway, good stuff. So I've got another picture here, and this is sort of an example of a really, really drastic tell size. This is a place in Turkey that's called Zincirli, and this is ground level up here at the top. And this site has lots and lots of different levels of habitation. So it's got this one right here, which would have been like much more recent, and then this level that I was standing on, which is kind of like a late antique, and then an Iron Age, and then a Bronze Age all the way down here. But you can see just how deep this tell goes. This is probably, I would guess, 9 or 10 meters, or I don't know, this would be 35, 40 foot to the bottom here of the tell. And it actually does go deeper than that. Under that are Neolithic remains. The flowers are pretty. I don't actually know what kind of flowers those are. Just native wildflowers of Turkey. But pretty stuff. They're not poppies. If you want to see poppies, you know how to see poppies. Anyway, well, so Turkey does grow a lot of poppies, but they're the food version of poppy. They're not the heroin version of poppy. So there we go. Anyway, stratigraphy is really important, and it helps a lot, and it's one of the reasons why we pay so much attention to the dig, right? The dig is actually really, really important, and the method behind that is really important. And if you want to know more about that, I have done a viewer request stream on the history of archaeology, and we talk a lot about how different techniques developed and who developed them over time. So usually speaking, the poppies that are grown for poppy seeds are different than the poppies that are grown for heroin, because you want to focus on the production of the sap instead of focus on the production of the seed. And different strains of the poppy are better at that than others. So if you're trying to grow a whole bunch of heroin, you're probably not going to do very well with the food version of poppies. I mean, sure, you could do it, but it's not going to be as productive per square foot. And I'm not trying to tell you to go grow heroin poppies. Don't grow heroin poppies. Turkey has black roses. I've never seen any of those in the wild. Similar to hemp and cannabis, right? Different drugs and different things. Any poppy can be a heroin poppy if you believe. That's true, but if you're trying to maximize your effort... why am I telling you this? It doesn't matter. Anyway. Moving on. So, we have dig sites, and we have stratigraphy, and we can see the tells, and we can go dig stuff up, and we can find things out through comparing things here and there. But then we eventually make writing. And man, when we make writing, this makes history in many ways so much easier. Because then people can tell us what was going on. Now, there are problems with that we'll get to in just a little bit, right? But where did we start when we're talking about writing? If we look at the earliest versions of writing, we're looking at stuff like this. So these are examples of what are called inventory tags. And these were recovered at a site called Abydos in Egypt. So what we're looking at here is a little tag that's probably made out of bone or stone, and it's got a little symbol carved into it. And the hypothesis here is that these would have been attached to certain things or used as a form of maybe an early receipt, but these predate the development of hieroglyphics. And if anything, these might be like super duper proto-hieroglyphics that were originally designed to mean a certain thing or represent a certain amount of a certain thing. But this is our first movements towards writing. And it shouldn't be super surprising that one of the first things we did when we wanted to write was write down contracts and figure out how we were going to buy and sell stuff, right? That always gets you curious. It won't sound stupid. How does the city get buried so much? Well, again, and Jamar, I don't know if you were here when we first started talking about this. I can flip back to this. Most of the ancient cities had walls that looked like this. So you would start building on what was originally the ground, but over time, if you keep bringing mud bricks to the top of the hill to build more buildings, that mud just starts decaying and mushing like this, and it makes stuff like this, right? Like you can see ground level here, and all of this is just people over time bringing rocks and dirt to this one location to keep building here, and over time it just builds up and builds up and builds up. So this is a process that happens usually over centuries, if not thousands of years. With all these archaeology trips, are we 100% sure that Shane isn't an international drug kingpin? I don't do drugs. I don't want to buy and sell drugs because that's what puts you in jail. I don't have the money or the connections or the impetus or particularly the ethics to buy and sell drugs. So no, I am not an international drug kingpin. They clearly read that we are reaching out to you about your car's warranty, right? So we wanted to make sure that we weren't getting ripped off in our deals, right? So you have to have some sort of record that shows what I bought from you. And this is especially true, and I use this reference all the time. So if you've heard this before, I'm not going to apologize, but you've heard it before. If I'm a person that farms and you are a person that makes baskets, I know that harvest is coming up, but I need your baskets so that I can go harvest my food. And I'm going to give you some food in exchange for the baskets, but you have to give me the baskets up front, right? So how do you make sure that I'm going to give you the right amount of food? And how do I make sure that you're not going to try to get me in trouble by saying that I owed you more than I actually did. Well, this is why we need writing, because I can do things like give you 3 little tiles that I made that might represent, baskets, and this is how many baskets I'm buying from you, and then you give me a certain number of little tiles that represent food, and this is how much food I'm going to give you back, so that when I go do the harvest, we can meet up together and go, okay, here's what I owe you, and here's what you owe me, and we can da 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 da. Now, obviously, that's an imperfect system, which is why writing then takes off to become more descriptive. But it's a process that takes a while to happen, because we today are very used to understanding that letters and squiggles and stuff like that represent words and thoughts and ideas. But that was a new concept to these ancient people, right? There's a fairly decent sized gap archaeologically and historically between these little tiles and this, which is a very, very early account of Sargon, who was the king of Akkad, which was a very, very powerful city in Mesopotamia. One of the first people that ever really started doing big scale war. There's a really big problem about Turkey that they take piles, walls, and doors from ancient times and throw them somewhere else because nobody gives a crap about it. There is some of that stuff. We're going to see Shane 3 months later dehydrated in the desert living with an RV in the background. No, thanks. Make baskets and spears to ensure fair trade. Well, Tuna, you would usually go to the priest for these things, and you would make your deal in front of the priest, and then usually make an agreement before the priest and a god, right? So that you didn't make the gods mad. Nasir, of course. Accounting people have been around forever, right? There's so many things that talk about a barter system like it's just a handshake, but being able to track that with writing would definitely be useful. Absolutely. Teresa, that's 100% correct. So this is cuneiform, and you can tell that it's a very repetitive style writing, but we can actually read this stuff. There are people who spend a long, long time of their life learning how to read all of these things. But again, this particular piece here is about 4,000 years old, right? But this is a tablet with cuneiform. So when we start writing things down and we can explain stuff, this really helps us know what's going on. How do we know what we know about history? Sometimes people tell us these things. They'll just say, hey, here's what happened. Here's what I was. Here's what I did. Here's what those people did. Now, obviously, human beings are human beings, right? And when we talk about human beings writing stuff down, this is messy stuff, right? Dun dun dun. Dun dun dun. 11 Usu, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the adventure. Bias, exactly. So, do we think that in 3400 BC, the people that made these inventory tags in Egypt had a bias? Yes, we do, because they were human beings. Do we think that in 2600, when we get our first example of like a written sentence, was bias? Yes, we do. And we actually can tell that because the earliest piece of writing that we have historically that's in a sentence or a narrative structure is something called the Kesh Temple Hymn, and it's a hymn to deities who are being praised. And if you don't think that religious people have bias, I'm not sure what world you live in. But then we see these concepts morph over time, and we see them being used for other stuff, like burial inscriptions around 2400 BC in Egypt, and we see them being used for law codes around 2400 BC in Mesopotamia with people like Uruk-agina. And then we see them starting to write stories and mythology, and we get the stuff like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which probably dates back to like 2250 BC. And we start getting the earliest examples of history with things like the Royal Egyptian Annals, which go back to about 2400 BC. So we see them using this to describe the world around them, and we can learn a lot from that. I wonder if this is Itsu. and I pronounced your name incorrectly because the font made that T look like another 1. Welcome in. Good to see you. How'd you find us? I'm always interested to know how people came by the stream. So we have a bias, and we say things that meet our needs, and we say things that suit our viewpoint, and we write things that are going to be pro us and anti them. And this is not something that's a modern problem. This is a human issue, right? When humans have preferences, we're going to write those down. And that stuff means that we have to be a little bit skeptical about stuff. Just because we read it doesn't mean that it necessarily is accurate. Just because it exists doesn't mean that it exists in writing doesn't mean that we can say that it existed in real life. Wonder what history's story would have been if there was no bias in the count of it. I would suspect quite a bit different. I don't know how it would have been different, but if people couldn't lie when they wrote stuff down, I think that the world would be in a lot of a different position. And the way that you would pick your president is not by having a debate. It would be writing an essay about why you wanted to be president. And if they couldn't lie, it would be very evident who is deserving to be president, right? Future historian, I may have uncovered evidence of a murder. This record accuses someone named Carol Baskin. Right. Just because the guy on Tiger King says that she killed her husband doesn't mean that she killed her husband, right? But we have to be aware of this kind of stuff. Somebody might think that guy was being legitimate and honest and that it wasn't a joke, right? I'd love to be a fly on the wall through that time of history to see both sides. Wouldn't we all? There are so many things in history that we'll just unfortunately never get to know because we won't ever be able to come full circle with that stuff like that. We'll never be able to actually go back in time and watch it happen. So we can't always identify the bias. We can't always identify exactly which side somebody's on. Even if they're trying to be objective, they're still going to be subjective about some things. It's just what happens. So what's interesting here is that we go a really, really, really long time without any kind of organized attempt at figuring out whether or not stuff that was written down is really completely accurate. Now, you do see some periods in history where some people go, those histories suck and we should get rid of them. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is being done by conquering forces. Like, for example, a guy named Shi Huangti, who's the first emperor in China. When he took over as the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, he decided that he only wanted things done his way. And as a way of establishing himself in power, he burned a whole lot of people's books because he didn't like the way that they were portraying things. Because he wanted things shown his way, and he thought that they were super biased. So we recognized in history that we have this bias, and we recognize that documents weren't necessarily always going to be 100% accurate or reliable, but we don't really have an organized attempt at figuring out how or why. It bothers me that we will never know everything. There's stuff that's definitely in the oceans that we won't. Yeah, exactly. The drive of the young historian and the young archaeologist is to find the thing that nobody knows and then figure it out, right? Everybody wants to be the person that figures something out. That's sort of like the crowning jewel of a history person or an archaeology person. I figured out where this was, or I figured out what happened here. But unfortunately, even that drive has an impact on how we do our research through reflexivity, through lack of personal awareness, and we start impacting the things that we're doing on a research level because we want to be the person that does that. And we'll take logical leaps that we wouldn't normally. We will overlook things that we would not overlook in other people's arguments. We will allow things to skate on much thinner ice than we would allow somebody else to skate because we want to be the person that does it, right? We'll go where the funding is. That's a great point, Silver, because in history and archaeology, there's not money anymore. Especially after COVID, the money has dried up quickly. People stopped giving money during COVID times when nobody was doing archaeology. And when people went back to wanting to do archaeology, people that had money realized how much other things they could do with that money, right? Your Egypt dig was like that. Your professor discarded so much data and artifacts because it wasn't the time period that he was interested in. It was appalling. Exactly, sci-fi. That's the problem with a lot of this stuff. Like, we're biased. And it's okay to admit that, but we have to allow for that to be a thing. And Tuna's, of course, never biased, right? Let me talk to you a little bit about this guy. An Italian guy named Lorenzo Valla. And this is a picture of him from a little bit after he died. So whether or not this is an accurate picture of him, we don't really know. But this is Lorenzo Valla. Why are we talking about this random guy from the Renaissance? Well, because he's one of the first people that decides to try to make an actual go at these things. He wanted to figure out how we can know what we know when it comes to writing. He really wanted to try to see if he could get to the bottom of some things, right? And specifically, one of the documents that had always bothered him was this document that was called the Donation of Constantine. And this is a long, long story, but the story in a nutshell kind of goes like this. Constantine, the emperor, gave a bunch of land directly to the Bishop of Rome, and this land was referred to as the Donation of Constantine. And for a very long time, the Catholic Church had a document that was supposed to have been written by Constantine himself that donated this land and this money and the proceeds of this area to the Catholic Church. And this was something that the Catholic Church was holding on to all the way through when Lorenzo Valla lived in the 1400s. So I think he was only in the 1300s. I think he died like 1386. Don't quote me on that. Obviously, the church wouldn't lie, right? So he decided that he wanted to dig into this Donation of Constantine. So he started doing some of the earliest work in what we go on today to call textual criticism. And what he discovered after applying textual criticism to the document is that there is no way the document itself would have ever been written at the time of Constantine. And when he made this known, he didn't just say, this is a fake. He said, this is a fake, and here's why. And on top of that, he added all of this data and this proof. And he pointed at certain phrases and terminology that were not in use during the time of Constantine. And he could show when those specific phrases and terms got introduced into the language. And he also looked at specific terminology for things like place names and terminology for sites and said they didn't call these places and things that name at that time. So obviously, several hundred years after Constantine, somebody in the church faked up this document and then used it as a way to say that the Catholic Church got all of this land and all of this power in this particular region. And when he published this, it made a big old stink. And of course, the church was really, really upset, and they said that all of his work was garbage, and he got in a lot of trouble. But this is seen sometimes as like not necessarily what started the Protestant Reformation, but it started casting doubt on the authority and the accuracy of everything that the church had said was legitimate. So if this wasn't something like, I don't think Martin Luther read Lorenzo Valla's treatise and said, I will question the church. I don't think that's what it was. But the atmosphere surrounding the church was definitely one of a little bit more criticism at that point. Right, we're fact-checking the church, and of course they don't like that very much. They only fact-check one side. Right. You're in the Air Force. Okay, we're checking back and forth, talking with each other. The biggest issue you had with archaeology was the lack of pay. Yeah, because there's no money in it, right? There's just no money in it. Some conspiracies only require half a dozen people in the know, and that makes them plausible. Sure, but the purpose that we're getting at here is, like, Lorenzo Valla started a tradition that was going to be one that asked the right questions. And if we move forward a little bit in time, we can get to the guy that is today credited by many as the dude that really made textual criticism work. Am I spelling it right? Yeah. Von. So Leopold von Ranke, who is this guy? Leopold von Ranke was a German guy in the middle and late 1800s, and he's the guy that sort of decides that we need to make textual criticism an actual field of study. And he had a lot of really, really important goals, and he had a lot of really important angles that he was trying to accomplish. For example, one of the things that he wanted to emphasize really heavily was empirical data. And it's kind of hard sometimes to get empirical data from a text, but what can we say about this text is absolutely empirically true? Can we take a document and maybe sort of cannibalize it into parts and find what we can definitely say about this document being true, and then can we use that information to then further decide whether or not any of this other stuff that we just pulled out is more or less true? Can we determine the validity of some of these tangential things? And the focus here on empirical analysis is really, really important, because this is also going to be a recognition that we have to try to set aside our bias, right? We have to try to separate ourselves from the values and the angles and the goals and the propaganda that we might want to push and the arguments that we might want to make, because we're trying to be data-driven. And data-driven is important. Also, he said that when we're trying to determine if something is valid, historically speaking, we have to rely on the primary sources more than the secondary sources. And this actually made a lot of people really upset, because in especially the medieval world and in the Renaissance world, and even into the middle and late Enlightenment world, the secondary sources were the stuff. You know, everybody went and read Homer, but the important books about ancient Greece were not Homer. It was, you know, so-and-so's treatise on the Greek culture, or so-and-so's assessment of the Greek religion, because these were the people making names for themselves. And these were the people that were being debated in the dinner halls and the salons and the places where people were gathering to discuss academic stuff. You didn't sit around and talk about the primary sources. You sat around and talked about everybody's ideas about the primary sources. But what von Ranke is saying here is that by doing that, you are eliminating the need to actually examine the primary source. If you're just taking it at face value as accurate, you're not necessarily understanding that there might be reasons to quibble about it. If we're only talking about what I wrote about it or what you wrote about it, this is ultimately just an academic fluff piece, right? We're not really talking about the meat of the matter. We're talking about what Jimmy thinks Homer said, right? And that's obviously something that caused a big stir, because this also means that in a particular situation with something like, you know, religion, the primary document, which would be the scripture, has more validity and more weight than somebody writing about the primary document, which would be something like an early church father or a priest or the Pope. Similar to Christopher Columbus and the ideas of discovery. Kind of, sort of. Columbus was really interested in looking at the maps and trying to figure stuff out, not necessarily what people said, right? Not necessarily what people thought about. He wanted experiences that he could base his ideas on, and the legitimacy of what people had actual factual evidence on, not necessarily what people were feeling about things, right? What Jimmy thinks Homer said was the title of a term paper in high school. Moose, that's a good one. Please drive all over and tell this to my family. Well, I mean, the VOD is about to be on YouTube, and you can link it to them if you want to. Another thing that von Ranke got in a lot of, not necessarily trouble, but he made a lot of people mad with, is he decided that he wasn't going to try to focus on taking primary documents or history and dividing it into categories. He really didn't like this drive that was coming out of the 1800s to categorize everything, right? What's up, Chris? Good to see you. We don't need to necessarily cram everything into these arbitrary distinctions, right? All right, Claire, good to see you. Like, we don't need to argue about when we should end our description of the Middle Bronze Age and when we should start our description of the Late Bronze Age. We should be more focused on when this event happened based on what year. If we're arguing this nitpicky stuff about like, oh, well, obviously the culture changed enough that this is now moving from Middle Bronze Age to Late Bronze Age, we're missing the point. We're not actually describing the material anymore. We're arguing about our semantics. And that's what a lot of academia was doing and still is doing. Because they're not paying attention to the sources. Again, they're still more interested in paying attention to what everybody is saying about them. So while, you know, like me, I can understand why we have things like Iron Age, Bronze Age, you know, classical period, etc. I get that because it helps us ideologically put a framework around things. But if we're going to spend our entire life arguing that the classical period in Greece starts in this particular year with this particular date, why? Why? Right? What's the point in that? It's an arbitrary distinction that you're trying to nail down and make it legitimate. You're basing all of this on your personal bias, right? The ancient people didn't go, today we mark the beginning of what will become the classical age of Greek history. No, they were just living their lives, right? And that's the stuff that von Ranke said we should be focusing on. What's actually happening? What are they saying in the sources? What are we doing in the sources? And he also really sought to understand the way that things really were. Not how we think they were, how they really were. And if it doesn't say it, you can't claim it, right? If it doesn't say this is what these people were doing, we can't necessarily assume that's what they were doing, right? If it doesn't say, hey, we know who these people are, we can't directly assume based on the text alone that they knew who those people were. We can't look at the text and read stuff into it. We have to look at what was actually in the text. But this really did start textual criticism. And this is where we get the beginning of the organized field of historiography. And this is really important because the point here is that we want to create a field that is going to allow us to work with valid, accurate, and legitimate facts. And sometimes we have to admit that just because we have a document doesn't mean that we know what's going on. We can't always just look at something and say, oh, well, we've got a first-hand account. We know exactly what's going on. Do we? Maybe. Are there things in that document that we can say are valid, accurate, and legitimate? Sure. In most ancient documents, you're going to be able to find things that are very easily provable. But how much of the rest can we take at face value? This is the kicker here. We can't always do this. But we can try to eliminate our bias when looking at this, and we can try to understand the bias of the person writing it and eliminate that from the situation as well. And what we're left with is a sort of a distilled version of the facts, right? Another reason you went away from the academia, yeah. I've thought on this recently. Many of the sources I read refer to Pliny the Elder, but you've never read Pliny. Von Ranke would say that you haven't really learned about the topic then. And I'm not trying to criticize you, Tuna, but what von Ranke would say was, you've read what other people think about him. And those people might be accurate. Those people might be legitimate. They might be unbiased. They might be giving you what they think is the honest version of things, but they also might not be. So you go read the text, and you go read the primary sources. And I'm big on this. I could pull 3 or 4 of my professors from undergrad and grad school in here, and they would tell you the same things. I would rather read a primary source twice than read a secondary source. The vast majority of people that write academic papers get told that they need to read primary sources in. They need to go find more primary sources. I had my thesis advisor and all the members of my thesis committee telling me that I needed to go read more secondary sources. And I'm like, why? I don't need what they said. I can read it for myself in the original language and tell you what it means. And they're like, well, you don't have a degree yet. And I'm like, isn't that part of the problem though? Like, can't people just read stuff and get it? Anyway, soapboxy moment. Sock now, what's up? I'm studying languages. Yes, semantics are so debated in our culture, like in Espanol, para ir or para llevar, right? So are we going or are we leaving, right? Which one? How does this mean? What are we distinguishing here, right? Like, voy a la casa, right? I go to my house, right? Is that different than I leave for my house, right? What's up, Junk Collector? Accept the Bible. That is the unvarnished truth because the Bible says so. That's true, and the church also says so, right? And particularly the King James Version, Revelations 12, which says that if any man takes or subtracts from this book, his name will be blotted out from the Lamb's book of life, right? Yeah, scary stuff, right? This whole stream is giving you PTSD from your school/archaeology days. I'm sorry, sci-fi, but I talk about this because this is what people don't know, right? This is why I wanted to cover this at the beginning of the Adventures in History stream back in, again, 2020, because I wanted people to think about this stuff and know about this stuff so that for all future streams, because I was a wee young lad of 36 and thought that everybody would watch every episode forever and they would learn everything immediately upon first hearing, right? Twitch is a primary source, right? What's up, Noger? How's it going, man? I am a primary source, but I am only a primary source for my life experiences. I am not a primary source for anybody else's life experiences. Let's see. King James Version, good enough for Peter and Paul, right? Because Jesus spoke with a received English accent, obviously. I forgot that revision and Revelations had the same abbreviation. Apologies. We need this in Archaeology 101. You do. You really do. Shipment of fail. You saw it on Twitch, right? So it's got to be true. If you see it on the internet, it's got to be true, right? This is really good information. I appreciate you sharing this stuff. Absolutely, Teresa. So I like doing this just in general because I like talking about this stuff and I like talking about it with people that are interested. This stream is a little bit different than what I would normally do on stream history wise because I'm usually telling like a period of time at a specific location. But this is really valuable information for us to understand things like how we can say as a historian, here's what it is and here's why. Twitch puts the prime and primary source. There we go. There we go. I wish that I could learn Greek so that you could see what Jesus actually said in the 4 Gospels and the other parts of the canon. Sock now, you can. Koine Greek is not the most difficult language to learn. It's actually easier than Latin in many, many ways, especially if you're going to read old school primary documents. There are a bajillion study aids out there because of the fact that the Bible was written in Greek. You can find a bajillion different YouTube series and books and study guides and things like that you can use to help you learn. And if that's something that you're after, it's never too late. It's never too late. You like the topic? It's a good one. I agree. Everyone should have to read Gilgamesh in the original cuneiform. I wish. I actually started trying to learn cuneiform, Sumerian cuneiform, for a little while because I thought that I might go get a PhD in classics, and the dyslexia was real. When you only have one shape and you're just repeating that one shape, tilted and turned, and multiple versions of it stacked on top of each other, no thanks. Your primary sources of interest in history, sure. There was a doubt about interwebs facts, yeah, for sure, right? I would love to read Mark 10 and see what he meant by for this reason. Oh, yeah. Right. Shane learning cuneiform sounds like you learning Thai. Maybe. I don't know if that was a tough one for you, but me learning cuneiform was not something that I appreciated. So, if we have documents and we have facts from archaeology and we have stuff, what happens when we put them together? And this is the beautiful thing, right? The beautiful thing happens when you put them together. So I can actually show you how this can go together. So in one of the really cool ancient documents that we have from Mesopotamia, we have a story of a king going over to the region that we call today the Levant, or places like Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, and kicking a whole bunch of butt and burning down a whole lot of stuff, right? And we have this document, and it's written in the Chronicles, so we know his name and the ruling year. So we have a timeline of his reign. We know because of comparative dates about what time that reign was. And we know where he went, because we found archaeological evidence that would support his troops being in this area at this time. And the reason I'm putting this together this way is because I showed you this photograph earlier, and I specifically showed you this layer at this place in Jordan called Tel El Hammam. And the reason I showed you this particular burn layer is because we can tell you exactly when that burn layer happened. Because we know that there was a big war in this area, and we know that there was a big battle in this area, and we know that this city got burned, and because of the artifacts that have been dug up in this area, we know exactly when this timeline was, and because this timeline corresponds with the document that we have from Mesopotamia that says this place got burned, we can tell you exactly when that burning happened. Right? Butt kicking verified. But what this takes is work, because you have to do the archaeology the right way, and then you have to critique the documents the right way. And this is a problem in a lot of situations, because if your archaeology is bad, it might throw off your dating. If your literary critique is bad, it might throw off your dating. But in these magic moments, when everything comes together, we now have this point in time where we can say the army from Mesopotamia was at this location and it burned this city down. And we can take that date and look at all of the artifacts that are in that layer, in that particular strata in the city. And then we can take a sample from another city, maybe 100 miles away, that wasn't burned. And when we start finding the same types of relics, artifacts, pottery, etc., at that location, we can say we're getting close to this timeline, right? Because we know that we changed our pottery techniques over time, and we can do comparative site analysis where I have a layer that has this particular type of pottery. I have another site that has this particular type of pottery. We know exactly what site dates are for this place. We can now make a relatively educated guess about what the sites are for that location as well. The dates are for that location. And we can just do that everywhere, and it overlaps. So just because you're digging up a site in this part of the world doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to have ramifications on stuff that happens across the planet, right? There was an archaeological dig. This is one of my favorite stories. Archaeological dig going on in Japan about a decade ago. And at the bottom of this old castle, they found a little container of coins. And the container of coins had Roman coins that were from the classical period of Rome. So we can now tell you that this layer in Japan has to be at least this old. Right? So it's kind of crazy, right? You would never have expected to date a time space in Japan based on Roman numismatics, but it happens because these people might not meet each other or talk to each other directly, but their stuff gets around, right? And we can do comparative archaeology stuff. We can look at sites and see how things have changed. We can look at stuff and see how techniques move from place to place. And because we can do this and we can compare this with textual sources that we have, we can get really good timelines for a lot of this stuff. So I know that it seems like I spent a lot of time at the beginning of the stream saying we don't know anything. We can't ever know anything. There's no way we can know everything. There's a lot of stuff that we can know, right? And when we can know things, it's really, really cool, right? Is the only Greek you know, and it took a whole week of you saying it wrong to people to learn it. Efkaristopoli, right? You didn't learn like not even like Kalimera or Kalispera or anything like that when you were in Greece. The only academic source that is more accepted in scholarship as an accurate English version is the NRSV. I'm Spartacus. Thank you so much for the Spartacus. And I didn't give Tommy any Spartaci. I apologize. So Tommy, these Spartaci are for you. New Revised Standard, New American Standard and New American Standard Update are both used very frequently in academic research for the Bible. Nobody uses the NIV though. I did an undergraduate class that talked about the Old Testament and compared the stories with archaeological evidence and other written sources. It was a very interesting class. Sci-fi, you might find it interesting. This particular site, Tel El Hammam, is hypothesized by some biblical scholars to be Sodom, the city of Sodom from the Jewish scripture Christian Old Testament. Yep. If somebody wants to redeem the adventure hat, I'll tell you a fun little story and show you some pictures. Amplified Study Bible. Amplified Study Bible is not not considered a good source for academic study. Amplified Bible is very loosely translated. You forgot about those more than you remembered? Yeah, cool. How do you do that? Like that. Okay, so the adventure hat has been summoned. And I'm supposed to have been wearing this pretty much the entire stream because all of these pictures that I've been showing you, except for a couple, are mine. But let me find a photograph for you. So I was at Tel El Hammam. I think I maybe have actually shared this before. Possibly. I'm trying to find a picture that's just me. I was with a group of students at this location, and I don't want to show their faces because I don't have their permission to show them on my stream. Well, I'll take that back. I have permission from one person. Oh, yeah, okay, here we go. I can show you this one. All right, so again, the hypothesis here is that Tel El Hammam might be the biblical Sodom. So this particular photograph, here I am. This is actually pre-adventure hat. This is when I was just wearing a baseball hat on site. But this is me down the hill. So the Tel is kind of oblong shape. And then you go back down the back side of the hill to the back part of the city. So this is me looking at the rear entrance to Sodom, and I am about to walk into, or you might say, enter the rear gate of the city of Sodom. So, there you go. Enjoy that as much as you would like. Anyway, And Matt wants to do poppies. All right, let's do poppies. Here we go. Peace and joy be with you all. The world is your oyster. Love it. Experience it. Grasp it. Love things. Love people. Have good times. Enjoy the beauty in the world around you. Is there a high concentration of salt and sulfur? No. I don't think that the city itself was destroyed by things falling from the sky. Those are the right kind of poppies, right? Just keeping my eye on Viper's last message while listening to Shane. I see. Yeah, so that's your moment of zen, right? Those are the food version of poppies, right? All right. So, I hope that was a fun little diversion. But anyway, you take artifacts and you take stratigraphy and you take literary stuff and you mush it together and you get history. And this is what we teach, and this is what we should focus on, and this is how we should explain that we know things. Because just saying, oh, we know it because it was in a book, or oh, we know that because we dug it up, that doesn't always cut it. We need to be able to explain why. What research methods did we use to determine that what we dug up was accurate? What critique methods did we use to determine whether or not that source was legitimate, right? We can't always just take things at face value, and we have to be critical of things. Critical gets a bad rap because in many situations, critical is associated with a negative thing, but critique is something that we should just apply across the board and have a healthy level of skepticism for all sources, right? We should just be legitimate and intelligent and apply a healthy level of skepticism when trying to determine anything. So why should we not do the same thing on an academic level? And this is how we know what we know, right? Okay, so that is how we know what we know part 2, which is the second part of a stream that I did a long time ago. And again, for those of you that might not have been here at the beginning, I'm doing this because I have started moving all of my VODs to YouTube after everybody has bugged me about it for years. And in the process of moving those over, I had lost some of the VODs from Twitch. So I am now re-recording these discussions with potentially new material to put them into the YouTube playlist so that there aren't gaps in the playlist. So you can follow the stream there. I don't know what it's called. I think it's subscribe to YouTube, but subscribe doesn't mean anything. You just click a button and you see when I've posted stuff. It's not like subscribe on Twitch where you actually have to pay money. Subscribing on YouTube is free. But if you want to know when I'm posting more stuff, there you go. And there are already about 40-something videos on there, which is probably more VODs than a lot of people ever wanted to watch. I will point out that everybody was like, oh, you should have all of your stuff on YouTube. And I've started putting stuff on YouTube, and nobody's watching it. So, wondering if the people that are complaining about me not having stuff on YouTube are actually going to follow through and watch all of it. I don't know. I guess people will find it. Not nobody. Not there are some videos that have as many as 2 views. But what's really funny is that the average time for most of my videos is like 10 or 15 seconds. Nobody yet, right? Eventually I'll hit the jackpot and people will find me. And, you know, then I'll just make all the money. I'm not ever expecting to make money off of YouTube. Their threshold for monetizing YouTube is insanely high. You have to have 500 subscribers, which is basically 500 followers, and you have to have a certain number of hours total watched within the last period of time, and I significantly doubt that I'll ever get that high of a number. It's a lot. It's way harder to monetize YouTube than it is to monetize Twitch. So I'm mostly just doing it because people have asked, and I guess if I'm going to try to be professional about things, I should try to maximize my coverage, right? But that is all that I have for the moment about the topic. But if anybody has any questions about this stuff, or has any questions about other stuff, or if you want to do something like redeem any channel points or anything like that, now would be a good time to do so. It's all good. Having this educational material in as many places as you're willing to put it helps edify humanity. And Silver, that's ultimately the motivation that got me over the hump. There was a lot of like people going, you should do it, and that was starting to get kind of annoying, which I think was ultimately the point. But like I figured if I was going to do all of this stuff and a random person might run across it, there you go. FYI, Shane is good for train rides. Yeah, well, there we go. Right. How do we know what we don't? That's pretty easy. We start looking, and when there are these big gaps, we just know that we don't know that. And then we have to go try to find out if we do know it. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. Right. But yeah. So I hope that was fun. I enjoyed going back over this stuff again. I liked incorporating stuff that I have seen since and I have used since. Right. I read there was a math professor who puts his math videos on. Oh, wow, because he's trying to reach college students. Interesting. I think I've heard of that, Chocobo. I don't know if that was like a legitimate thing or if that was like an urban myth. I don't know. I didn't go look, right? So, all right. Let's see who's around. Maybe we can go do a raid real quick. I'm hoping that some people might be around, and the person that I really wanted to raid is no longer streaming. I found in my travels to Dragon Con and Gen Con, I found more cool people. And I had hoped that I would be able to raid one of those cool people tonight because she was streaming before me, but she's off. Yeah, we're going to end up raiding Cryo. If you're an over-the-road truck driver, long content is great. There we go. Yeah, Cryo doesn't stream very much anymore, so if we can raid Cryo, we're totally going to raid Cryo. It's been a long time since we have raided Cryo. So kind of last call for questions or point redeems or anything like that, and then we'll go start a raid. According to commentaries, justos is more used like the word because of. It's an interesting one. But the problem that you're going to run into there is looking at not just the original text that you can find it, but also the potential variants for the text, which are interesting as well. What's the link to the YouTube? Hey, I got a command. There we go. What's up, Cliff? Good to see you. Some history guy. The future hat. Okay. So I'll take this off and I will don the future hat. What am I supposed to be predicting, Nogre? What shall I use my future powers for? The next con Shane will go to. So the future hat, I think people just redeem it because they want to see the future hat. You could have just asked me what convention I'm going to go to next. I don't actually know. I'm trying to go to more things to do more academic-y kind of stuff, right? Like, I would love to be able to go to some of the big conventions and just do panels and be on panels and talk about stuff. That's a lot harder than it sounds. A lot of the big conventions are very much inside baseball, and you have to know people to know people. There was a thought next year that I might be going to Japan over the summer. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. If that doesn't happen, there's a chance that I might go to Heroes Con, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. I do know the people that run panels there but my attempts at getting panels going there would be tough, right? Maybe. But I have already been in talks with people about teaching classes at Gen Con, which is in Indianapolis next year. And I have already been talking with people about expanding my role doing panels at Dragon Con, which is in Atlanta next year. So those are on the scales. I'd like to go to some of the other ones if they have panels and stuff, and I might end up going to work with people because I found out that, I mean, there's potential profit to be made in working conventions with people, so I might go to other ones in the summer that I don't know about yet. So probably Heroes Con, maybe. Probably Heroes Con, maybe. That didn't make any sense, did it? All right, so there's that. You'd like to get the primary sources for the Book of Mark? Well, you can get the Greek, and you can find an interlinear Bible that'll have the Greek, but then you have to ask yourself, which Greek are you getting? Are you getting the Textus Receptus Greek, which is probably what most people are going to use? Or are you getting some other abbreviated Greek? Or are you getting some hybrid Greek where they've taken some from one source and some from another source? Textus Vaticanus. There's a lot of things to ask even with that. All right, so now we have the opinion hat. Do I think the debate changed the election? No. I still think Trump is going to win. I do think Kamala got a little bit of a bump with independent voters, but I don't think it's going to be enough to matter. I think at this point the biggest question about the debate map is Pennsylvania. I think Harris is likely to win. Well, she's probably going to win Wisconsin. I think that's pretty much decided. She's probably going to win Michigan. I think Trump is going to win Georgia and North Carolina, and that's going to leave Nevada as a toss-up. I think Arizona is pretty clearly going to go towards Harris. I don't think that's really much of a swing thing. Nevada is a toss-up, and Pennsylvania is a toss-up. The kicker there is that Nevada doesn't really have as much weight electoral college-wise as Pennsylvania. I think it's going to come down to whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the election, and I don't think that there are a lot of people in Pennsylvania that would have particularly been swayed by the material that was discussed. One of the biggest things in Pennsylvania is going to be economic stuff, and neither person really said anything about economics except for Trump talking about tariffs. I think that actually hurts him a little bit in Pennsylvania, especially with steelworkers unions, because the last time that happened, they took a lot of the brunt of it. So ultimately, I think it changed it a little bit. Harris is probably going to get a bump in polls after this, but we shouldn't trust that because national polls aren't really going to matter here. Again, it's going to come down to how the swing states vote. So you need to keep your eye on things like Pennsylvania in-state polling and Nevada in-state polling and Michigan in-state polling and maybe Arizona in-state polling, but I'm pretty sure Harris is going to win Arizona at this point. Trump's going to win Georgia. The Georgia Republicans have done so much to basically make voting very, very difficult for people of color that it's going to significantly impact that in the long run. All right, so there we go. Do you know where I could get them? You can just, if you're looking for Greek interlinear Bibles, you can find that online. You can just Google like interlinear Bible, but you can also buy those from any decent bookstore or Amazon if you want to buy them from Amazon. I think Lifeway still has an online presence that you might be able to buy from. So there's that. If I go to Japan and you're still here, let me know. I will. I don't know if it's going to happen. The plan was to go with friends, and I don't know if their situation is stable enough right now to afford that. So I think it's probably off the table. What kind of con do I typically go to? Nerdy stuff. I don't really usually go to the academic conventions because everybody there hates my guts because I'll ask the questions that they don't want to answer and then they get mad at me.
I like going to the nerd conventions because they're actually much more accommodating and have better conversation, even about academic things. You think Taylor Swift had a bigger effect than the debates? I don't think so. I don't think it moved the needle as much. But independent voters aren't young. Independent voters are in their 30s and 40s. And while there are people in their 30s and 40s that are Taylor Swift fans, I don't think that Taylor Swift's endorsement is going to change very much. I don't think youth are going to go vote. All of these people that are running to register to vote are going to be the same people that ran to register to vote that didn't show up to vote for Hillary, that didn't really show up very much to vote for Biden, because they just don't vote. I could be wrong, and I would love to be wrong, but I don't think it was that big of a deal. The only topic Harris was actually good on was abortion. She was great on that. There's a real chance that abortion matters everywhere, even Pennsylvania. But then again, nobody was really in doubt where they still had abortion. So yes, Frank, that's a really good synopsis. Biggest effect: sharing link to register to vote. The wife and you will go with. The kicker there is that my friend was going to be in a position to afford a lot of the bill, and we were going to basically be living on his good graces. Gallifrey 1 gets JPL folks to show up. You look forward to your Mars updates each year. Interesting. All right. Let us go ahead and work on this raid. My voice, it be cracking. So we're going to go raid Cryomera, who is a friend, who is one of the people that is legitimately responsible for my stream being a stream. If it weren't for people like Cryo, my stream would have died, because when I started streaming, she was one of the people that kept bringing people to my house. She's the reason I stream Gundams. She was the main motivator behind me doing Gundam build streams. So Cryo and I are linked through the Twitch, and I've met her in person. She's amazing. So we're going to go raid Cryo. She's a really great artist. Let me make sure that I say thanks. Thanks to everybody that is subscribed in the channel. You can see their beautiful badges beside their name, but there are people that support me outside of Twitch, and you can see my list of patrons for Patreon there, and you can see the people that have sent me books to read for academic purposes there, and I appreciate everybody all the time. So thanks to you all. Hope you have a wonderful one, and I'll see you maybe this weekend, but we'll kind of see how it goes. All right, everybody. Yell adventure when we get to Cryo's chat, and throw emotes if you got them, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.